Good evening, everyone. My name is Amiri. I am the author of the book, The Boy with Two Hearts, and my day job is just IT. That's what I like to call it. So let's just leave it as that. There you go.
That is a really humble intro. So Hamid Amiri is the author of The Boy with Two Hearts. Show of hands if you've read the book. Okay, a few hands. Show of hands if you've seen the play. Oh, okay, a lot more people. And show of hands if you've not seen any at all. You're here. Okay, we have like a kind of ish even split between the three. Okay, so I'm going to read the back of the book as the blurb because you don't want a formal intro. So just to ease into it. Hamid Amiri's family knew they would have to leave Afghanistan one day. Doctors could not treat his brother's rare heart condition. They did not expect to have to escape after the Taliban placed an execution order on Hamid's mother. Traveling across Europe for a year and a half, desperate for safety and the prospect of life-saving treatment, they suffered attacks from mafia and police, terrifying journeys in strangers' cars, punishing treks, days spent hidden in lorries without food or drink, and being robbed at gunpoint. Not only a gripping tale of a family crisis, The Boy with Two Hearts is a love letter to Britain's health service, which provided hope and reassurance as they sought asylum and fought to save their loved ones. Okay, so that leads me on to the first question, which is, in your words, why did you write this book? What for people who've never read it before or seen anything about it, how would you kind of summarize this book?
How would I summarize the book? So I think there are multiple factors for me why I wrote the book. One of them was mum and dad, a way to say thank you for all the sacrifices they made for us. Another one was for my older brother, Hussein, who passed away in 2018, and it was a way to cement his legacy and a way to capture his cheekiness, his laughter, the way he was. I think another one was for me to give an insight to why people make those journeys, and it's not numbers, it's people with reasons. And I think the last one is to inspire others to know that everyone has a voice, that you can put your emotion into words and share it with others.
Okay, so on the front of the book, it says it's a story of hope, right? You got numbers, but putting stories behind that numbers, the human story, and this book bridged that gap. It gave me an insight into what one person of the many people who are crossing the channel at the moment, what that life is. So I do recommend everyone to read the book. It's a really good book, and I came from a place which I didn't really want to read it, to really happy that I read it as a book snob. Anyways, so the front of the book, it says a story of hope. My takeaway wasn't that. I can see how you put the story of hope, because there's definitely a story of hope in the book. But my main takeaway from the book was it's almost like a story of tragedy. You made all that you did. I don't know if I should spoil the book for people who haven't read it. But you did all that hard journeying, right, to save your brother. And in the end, he had a good life, I guess, but he didn't really make it. If that makes sense. So there are different layers of it. And how do you feel about people taking taking different lessons from that book?
So I think you can interpret the book in a different way, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think the story resonates with people in different ways because we all have difficult moments. We all are on a journey, and you're not the first person who said it reads like a story of loss. So for me, if we didn't make the journey, my mum wouldn't have lived. If we didn't make the journey, I wouldn't have additional 17 years with my brother. So for me, I look at that and being grateful that I had that with my brother. But also, I think when you read the book, for me, you have a realization of live your life to the fullest, right? You don't know what's around the corner. My brother was 31 when he passed away, and he wasn't, I was hoping to be, an uncle and him still been around. So he wasn't expected. But when he did, and I put a post on social media about his death and the funeral, people start posting about how he impacted them, how he helped someone, how he paid for someone's lunch in university. And then I realized I need to write about the way he was and who he was and how we were like three brothers. So someone said to me, it's a story of family. I said 100%. Someone said a story of love. I said 100%. Someone said a story of loss. 100%. I think when you read it, it resonates with you differently depending where you are on your journey, depending what you've gone through, and depending what you've been exposed to.
I think so. It's a sign of a good book that it has many messages and is different layered. My follow-up question to that is, so speaking to you before, you wrote it almost as a legacy of your brother, the memoirs, but I guess the majority of people would read it as a story, as a refugee story. So how does that, what's your reflection on that, and that what you set out to write about actually became something completely different? Unless, of course, it was one of your intentions to write the story of a refugee.
So for me, there was 4 layers, right, or 5, and one of them was giving an insight to someone's journey being a refugee. I think one of the reasons the play was a huge success was because when you came in, you saw 3 boys, mum and dad, love of football, but then when you take a step back, you realize his family has gone from Afghanistan to UK, 18 months journey, and so many challenges along the way. So for me, it's that aspect of it, right? That it is a family story, it is a love story. And what I didn't expect is, have I shared this? I'm going to share this with you guys. So I never imagined the book will turn into a play, right? I never imagined the amount of people who've read the book or seen the play around the world. But I never also forget when we were driving in Cardiff Bay and you see the bronze golden dome in Wales Millennium Centre. And I said to Dad, I was like, Dad, one day your son's story is going to be on that stage. My dad said, you're crazy. And I never forget day one, the Wales Millennium Centre, full audience, and we're sitting on second row. And halfway through and it was the first show post-COVID, halfway through this lady tapped my dad's shoulder. He goes, are you Mr. Amiri? He said, yeah. He said, love, respect for your family. And there was something in my dad's eye that I never thought about, because now I get to say to mum and dad, me and Hussein, my younger brother, not only Hussein will never be forgotten, but he's been introduced to people around the world. And that is that gives me so much more drive and ambition to want to tell the story in different forum. But it's that look in their eyes that it's not healing, but it's just that. And I've had arguments with mum where mum's saying, I miss his voice, I miss, his cheekiness. I'm like, mum, 22,000 people came to see the show in London, right? They all know him. Everyone here put their hand up. And after this 1.5-hour session, right, they get to know my brother. And that's something that really drives me. And I'm so grateful and humbled to be in the situation to do that.
Yeah, I want to get onto the play in more detail later, but talk me through your creative process. So do you identify as a writer now? I mean, because before going into this, I remember asking you, I've never written a book before, So you came into this as somebody who went through like an incredible experience, to say the least, if that's even the right word to use, and taking that story into a book. Like, talk me through that. What was the process behind that, and like why? What was the creative process for it that led up to it? Because people who have kind of like done courses and are more established, they still haven't published a book, but you went from like 0 to 100 in that respect.
Creative process. I don't see myself as a creative person. That's the short answer, right? Someone with IT background, they're usually a very logical mindset. So don't ask me how that happened. Process. That's an interesting one, because for me, I just wanted to get my emotions on a piece of paper. And I was struggling even with the title, right? Because someone asked me this question, and they were like, what are the key stuff for a non-fictional book? And he was on the spot, and I came with like top 10 tips, if you want to call it. But for me, it was just start, right? Don't think about the title. And we had different versions of it, where there was one called Defiance. The Defiance one was trying to describe my older brother. But for me, it was just putting my emotions into words. I knew the beginning of the story because I knew if I had to put a timeline, it was my mum giving a speech against Taliban. I knew the whole 18 months, right, because it's very vivid, because it was just a long, horrible journey. And I knew the ending that I didn't want to write. So for me, it was just physically writing it. And someone asked me for how long did it take you. It took me 3 months to write 86,000 words, which was probably very unhealthy. But for me, it was also part of my grieving process. It was very cathartic. A word that I didn't know not so long ago. And someone said, was it that? I have no idea what that word is. And then I Googled it. I think for me it was, right? For me, it was a way to never forget my older brother. But I'll say it again, I never imagined the book actually getting published. I never imagined the theatre. As we sit here, this week actually, I was in Athens watching my play in Greek, and it was an absolute insane experience. And there are so many other stuff which I'm sure we'll come on to. So yeah, there you go. Creative, am I creative? No. Do I class myself as a writer now? I think I have to because I've published a book. I think for me is have belief in your story, in your journey, in your voice, and just start writing. Just start putting it into first paragraph, second paragraph. I'll be honest, the starting point is really hard, but once you get in the flow, then it's quite addictive because you can see it. And I never forget, he went from struggling the first 5,000, a quarter way, halfway, and I was like, I've written like 60,000 words, and I never imagined, coursework and assignment is what, 5,000, 10,000. So yeah, there you go. Long answer to a short question. But yeah, do I see myself as a creative person? I think I do now, because I'm doing random stuff.
The answer keeps changing.
Sorry.
One
Yeah.
day you're like, no, yes, no.
In reality, I shouldn't be a creative person based on the statistics. But my situation and me putting myself, I think me pushing myself to want to do something that I've never done before, unlock something in my mind, which now actually I know I have a creative side to it because it's gone from book to multiple other facets. That's there you go.
Just a follow-up question on that. You you mentioned quite interestingly that writing your thoughts was all part of your grieving process. So it's a very interesting way of grieving. So you started off writing to get your thoughts out. At what point did it become, I want to make a book?
I think I didn't know I'm going to get it published, right? So I had people, and I kid you not, and this is to your point earlier, telling me, by the way, you're a first-time author, you've never written before, and it's really hard, so be prepared. My best friend Mo, if you're watching this, he got me the Guiders book, writers, etc. There's like a red book, I never forget it. And he was like, oh, be patient. And I was like, no. I want to do this for Mum and Dad, right? I want the story to be out there. And really early on, I had the visual in my head. I'd love a thumbnail on Netflix. I mean, go to Mum and Dad. Mum, Dad, there's your son's story. There's your story, right? So I think for me, it was visualization, right? Or if I use one of my cheesy quotes is, visualization brings it to realization. I've got loads of them. But for me, it was I had belief in myself, even though people doubted it. And I'll never forget this, me saying, I'm going LinkedIn, and the lady who said to me, look, I can refine you 86,000 words to submit it. She said to me, look, by the way, it might take a year or two, and be prepared for a few rejections. Within a week, someone said, would like to speak to you. I went there, it was in close to Paddington, and the lady said to me, look, it's going to take a few months before they come back to you. Within 48 hours, they came back to me and said, we want to sign you up. It sounds like I'm making it up, but there's a book right there, right? And it says Easy for Book of the Week, which, again, I didn't know was a big deal at the time.
So obviously, this is, as far as like genres, this would be classed as a memoir, right? And so there's usually a lot of detail, especially when it's your personal experience. Like, I remember, it takes me a long time to read books, but I think I read this in like 2 weeks. And I remember reading, and it was very cinematic, very vivid. The details from country to country, the trauma that you had to go through. How much control did you have in what you published? And the reason I ask that is if anyone's been through the publishing process, it's like edited, chopped, let's make it a bit more, let's simplify it a bit here, let's tweak this a bit, let's make it more, it has to be, you have to sell this at the end of the day, it's more commodified into a product. How much control did you have over your details of the story? Did you have much pushback around the length of it, or the specific elements did you have an audience in mind? Because that's one thing a lot of people don't think about is, oh, this book actually has to sell. So what were your thoughts around that period?
I don't think I had any, if I'm being honest. I was just buzzed that they wanted to sign me up, right? The only thing I did say is I took the clause from the theatre and the film out of the contract because I already had the visualization. I want to make that happen. And weirdly, I already spoken to the theatre guys before the book came out, which is really insane. The 86,075, which is what the book is, was actually the lady called Sophie Bradshaw, who called her the editor before the book. She just refined it because she said you're kind of repeating yourself. Because Hussein, bless him, he had multiple episodes, and for me, the narrative, I explained every time he had an episode with his heart, and Sophie was saying, actually, you could just say he's had multiple episodes rather than describing it vividly. Beside that, I don't recall the publishers wanting to tweak it, because every chapter, if you want to call it, or every milestone was something quite graphical and dramatic, if you want to say it, but sadly it was my life, because someone even asked me, you were quite young because you were 10 when you left Afghanistan and you came to UK. I goes, yeah, but if you look at it from a scientific perspective, they talk about your brain is much more vivid and captures so much when you're going through a traumatic experience. And I said that 18 months for me was all traumatic, which is why it's very vivid, and I remember in very details, and my missus always says that you're a very visual person anyway, so that probably helped. But for me, there was 18 months of constant traumatic experience, which is why it's very vivid and detailed. And there is something around how much I wanted to share. Every time I got to a situation where I said to myself, do I really want to put that out there? And there's stuff in the book that I thought I would never share even with my parents. I'd take it to the grave. But I said to myself, is it going to help another person out there? And if the answer every time was yes, I said I have to be okay with my insecurities because it's going to help someone else. That's why what you see is literally me opening my heart with the world to tell what happened in our journey.
Very interesting. I just want to pick up on one point you mentioned about the trauma. As a child, it's relevant today as well, what's happening with Palestine and the children dying there. And you obviously recall the story. Do you feel as a child you felt the full trauma of what you're going through? Or was it because you're young, you don't really fully appreciate what's happening?
So I think I was young enough to not let it have a long-lasting impact, but old enough to understand what was going on. So if I look at my dad, he's got PTSD. So there's an age somewhere, right, where to your point, I was young enough to not have a long-lasting impact, or I don't think it has anyway, but then old enough to understand it. So for me, that's what it is, right? But did it impact me as a human being? Yes, it did. I have scars from it, but for me, I look at those as if I didn't go through what I went through, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't have resilience to tackle life challenges. And when I was younger, I actually saw it as a curse. I was like, why my family? Why 18 months? Why not 6 months? And I didn't feel normal. And I still don't. But now I say to myself, I'm that minority who isn't normal, who's going to be different, who's going to be unique. And that's how our mindset works.
Interesting. So I've read about something called post-traumatic growth, where a traumatic event doesn't necessarily break you. If in fact it makes you stronger. Now, from your story, it seems like the trauma that you went through didn't have a negative effect, but in fact driven you, made you more driven, gave you you've grown from it, from the experience, whereas your parents probably still have the trauma. As you mentioned, your dad has PTSD from it. How much do you think was your growth from the trauma due to your age, being young, and how much do you think was from your own kind of yourself?
That's an interesting question because I've never thought about it that way. And if I'm being honest, there was a period when I came to UK, so this is from the age of 12 to about 15, 16, that it did hold me back. So I didn't have that mindset of, I'm different, I'm unique, because I messed up my GCSEs, I messed up my A-levels, and it's a running joke in the household when I say I messed up my A-levels, I picked business, biology, and physics, and I got U's across all three. So Heston always says, you must just not turn up to do the exam right. I think what happened for me was, there was a moment where my brother has seen a consultant in Southampton, and he talks about the operation. He says to Hussein, you're the 21st person to have had this operation. You're the youngest person to have had this operation. 60% success rate. And 14 and a bit hours. Hussein, without hesitation, says, yeah, let's do this. And I remember saying to him, I was like, bro, you understand what he just said? He said, yeah, I want to get this done. I want to get my degree. I want to help NHS. It was at that moment I had the realization, because it was me, Hamid, stubborn, troublemaker, however you want to label it. Hated the weather, complained about the culture, people, any excuse that I can think of. And then I looked at my brother and I said, he had all the same challenges, but he had the most rare, congenital heart disease. He had a successful 14.5-hour operation in Southampton, and at that time I'd failed my A-level and I was trying to work out what to do. He said to me, look, come to university, do a foundation degree, I'll put a good word in for you. And I had a B in my first language, or community language as they call it. Again, it wasn't enough UCAS points. They needed people to go to this course, a computer science course. When I got in, that's where my mindset changed, because as I looked at my brother and how he looked as into life, and then when I went to university, I got my head down and I said, give it all you got. And that hasn't changed. So over that university time and me becoming an adult, I've then flipped on his head and I said, okay, use the journey and my experience and my struggles as something that I can look back and say, if you've gone through that, you doing a project deadline, or you talking about your story, or you having a difficult conversation, it's nothing. And weirdly, I use that mindset. Again, I'll tell you something that I've not said it to many people. There was a talk not so long ago, it was like about 500 people. I was absolutely struggling, trying to stay, polite. Not that I was going to swear, by the way, right? And I had a friend of mine who works at British Red Cross, and she said to me, don't forget, you survived 18 months, you survived 6 months in Russia, you survived so much. So you standing up shouldn't be nothing. And I had to remind myself going, come on, you've got this. And it turned out to be one of the best talks, or in my head it was anyway. So for me, it wasn't straight away like that. Something triggered that for me was my brother, and actually changing my perspective. And now I use it every day to kind of say, I'm unique, I'm different, and I'm gonna be the first one to do something. I'm gonna be, but for the right reasons. So for me, and there's a school kid who I went to his school, and I always get questions when I go to some certain schools, and I said, never chase money, right? Chase success. Do it for a reason, have a purpose. So for me, it's my family. For me, I want to be a better person. So be it tomorrow, 5, 20 years later, I want to go to the good place, right? And that's what drives me.
You're definitely a middle brother, by the way. I'm telling.
Thanks.
So one of the really unique things about The Boy with the Two Hearts is it is a story of your refugee journey, but it also is a story where it ends in Wales, which is really interesting and something that I've never seen before, and something that I don't think is told very much. Most of the time when we hear about these stories, it's always like focusing on the Calais scenario with the Calais jungle and then over to Dover and then in England and then that's it. It kind of stops. But yours ended in Cardiff, and I loved the reference to the Cardiff-Swansea rivalry in the play, where with the football, and I think it was a really nice touch. But is that something that has been picked up on in terms of the response of your story in it being a refugee that came to Wales as opposed to another part of the UK?
I think it probably had a huge factor when it came to the theatre in Wales Millennium Centre, because you had that Welsh factor to it. And for us, when we came to Cardiff many, many years ago, I never felt the need to move because we've made a home here and a family. But it definitely played a factor in Wales Millennium Centre. What's really weird, interesting and fascinating is that didn't stop it going to London. And really, really weird, I could hear the reference of Cardiff City in Athens only a few days ago, which some of the audiences laughed, and some of them was like, I don't know what they're talking about. So yeah, it is unique, but I'm proud because, as I said, it's us, right? It's my family.
So let's talk about the play. Let's talk about the process in how you went from, just talk us through it. Like, how did it, you said you didn't expect it to be turned into a play, so it wasn't that you approached certain theatres. But yeah, talk me about how that started and how it ended up going into the Wales Millennium Centre as the first place.
So I'm having dinner with my university alumni, and there's a guy who's sitting at the side of the table. He changes seats and he sits next to me. He said, "What do you do?" I said, "Look, I'm writing a book," because the book wasn't even published. I'm writing a book. It's about a family. And I said, "What do you do?" He said, I work in theatre, or I used to, at Wales Millennium Centre, or WNO, the theatre, the National Opera side of it. I said, "Oh wow." I said, "Do you know someone?" Because I'd love to take my story into theatre. I think it's really powerful. He said, "Yeah, leave it with me." I thought it's one of those conversations he's trying to be nice. Fast forward a few weeks, he put me in contact, and for the first ever time, I walk into Wales Millennium Centre. I'm having a cup of coffee with Emma and Maris, who are from Wales Millennium and WNO. And in an hour, I just kind of say what the story is about, what my journey is about. They kind of go quiet. I chase them a few times, and fast forward 18 months later or 9 months later, Emma says, let's have a catch up. I'm just in the coffee shop because, look, we've thought about this and we'd love to take this project on. She said, "Have you ever been to theatre?" I said, "No." She said, "You might want to go see some shows."
So you'd never seen a play?
I've never been.
Okay, so you've never written a book, but then you wrote a book. You've never written, you wrote a book. You've never seen a play and then it turned into a play. This is
genuinely. And she said, "Have you been to theatre?" I goes, "No." She goes, "You might want to go see some shows." I got some free tickets to watch a show. I think it was called The School, and it was me and my brother. And we were like, wow, this is actually really powerful. Because you could see the stage and light and sound. And then they decided to get someone to help adapt a play. There's a guy called Phil Porter. Spent time with him to turn the book adaptation into theatre. And I'll never forget Phil asking me, "Well, why did you do this? And, what were you feeling?" And when we saw the script, I was like, oh, this is actually really powerful. Because it was the first time I felt my brother's essence on the stage. He felt like he was three of us again. And yeah, we were just blown away by it. Heavily involved. Someone said to me, "Do you actually say bros after?" I said, "Yeah, it's a common thing." So that was our line, and there was a few jokes in there that was our line, and there was a few bits that Phil said to me, how would you do this? Or to you, every question. This is where I realised actually I do have a creative side, because I was chipping in about the script and maybe we should do this way and that way. So yeah, there you go.
So I jump in on a point for your sake. So for people out there who have good stories, but they don't know how to move from a good story to getting it out there, what kind of advice would you give?
Self-belief is huge, but also just start writing. Right, and even if it's a chapter or two, just start writing. Because for me, we dwell too much on, is this story powerful enough? Has it got the angle? And if you have doubts, I have doubts too, and there are tons of articles about imposter syndrome, etc. But just write.
One thing that struck me about your story was that young girl that you met along the way. I can't remember her name. Zara. And we never knew, we never found out what happened to Zara. But the chances are she probably got sold into human trafficking. And it was quite heartbreaking because you hear about it, but then when you read about it, that Zara, just a child, and don't know where she is now, probably in London, probably, to be honest with you, in one of those, anyways, sorry. So, you mentioned another story on your journey, the smuggler who kind of went against everything and brought you over. The trouble is that the narrative with smugglers now is that they are painted as just black and white, the bad guys. Organised criminals take advantage of vulnerable refugees and getting too much money off them to take them on a dangerous journey across the channel. Do you feel that black and white narrative is what should happen, or do you think we should have a bit more nuanced when it comes to the smugglers?
I've shared my story or talked about my journey. I've given a snippet and insight into why people make those journeys. And even if it's one person versus 1 million or 500,000, whatever it is, I'm still contributing and changing the narrative. So for me, maybe in my head, how I'm processing it is, I'm still making a difference. I'd love to do a lot more. Do I get fatigue? I don't know, because not yet, right? I'm just very grateful to have been able to do what I've done, but also trying to inspire the next generation, because I stand up in front of people and I say, look, I'm not from here. I couldn't speak English. I failed my GCSEs. I failed my A-levels, and I had a dream to write a story. And to your point, never write a book. My brother says I've never read a book, which I dispute. I've read obviously my book, right? I have read other books as well, but anyways. But for me, I want to be that beacon of hope. And when I stand up and I tell my journey, people don't see refugee, people see Hamid. And what happens is when those people go to other circles and when they grow up and they talk about refugees, they go, well, actually, I met Hamid, he seemed normal, actually, he communicated, and actually, he was a nice guy, or he advised me, or he guided me. So I don't believe the narrative that you're telling me. And in my head, I hope that has a knock-on effect, that circle becomes 1, triple, etc. That's my hope. That when you see me, you don't see refugee, you see Hamid, and hopefully you walk away saying, actually, he gave me positive energy rather than negative energy, and that has a knock-on ripple effect.
Before we take a break, can I ask you what's next for Hamid Amiri, the writer, theatre director?
What's next? It's a long list, right? So I want to write other books. I've started writing another one. 2 technically. I'm in progress of writing them. I'm in discussion with the publisher who helped me last time to say if they like it. If so, then I'm going to go 100 miles an hour. The play is obviously officially, even now, is still in Greece. And I found out it's going to go to Cyprus. And I'm in dispute with my missus that if I can go to Cyprus to watch the show. And other countries in different continents, without going into details. I would love to be able to say sometime this year that the TV's been signed off. I can neither confirm or deny within advanced conversations and maybe a 4-part TV series, but I said I can neither confirm or deny. Me and my brother are doing some really cool, interesting stuff with the British Red Cross. Again, early discussions and NDAs and etc. And I think what I'd love to do, and I keep doing, is keep sharing my story in different forums, podcast style, public speaking, to just inspire the next generation. And I still have a full-time job in IT, project manager, software engineering, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, there you go. And there are other stuff, but I'm going to pause because that's probably enough.
Okay, so not that much then. You
No,
haven't got
no.
that much going on. Well, all I want to say is just thank you for telling your story and thank you for being so open and giving with your experience, because it's not easy, and it's not easy to listen to and to read and to watch, but to hear and for you to come again and again to share your story. Are you allowed to share what your other books are about?
Yeah, why not? I'll tell you one of them. So one of them is, it starts where The Boy with Two Hearts kind of ends. So it starts from grief, and it kind of follows a journey, how I used that grief, how I processed it, and turn it into something positive to share. But through that story, I want to talk about how the past impacted me. So the question that you asked, right, because that isn't in The Boy with Two Hearts, how the journey impacted me and how I use that to who I am today. I have got a working title, which I won't give it away. Another one, I'll be completely honest, and again, I'll share this with you guys, is I want to do a cookbook, right? Not because I'm a great cook. For those who's read the book, my mum loves cooking, and there are recipes that gets passed down a generation. So I want to capture those. And behind each recipe, there's a little story, like, you know, when was the first time or something. So that's something that I want to do, and I want to do it purely for my mum. And again, like in 50, 60, 100 years, you know, have like Amiri's cookbook would be pretty cool. And I'll never forget talking about the whole creative side of it. I wasn't even thinking about it. And I was in National Theatre, and we had Islam Channel, who I'd done an interview. And they were like, you should get your mum to do a cooking slot. I was like, yeah, go on then. They're like, oh no, seriously, do you want it next Friday? And I was like, let me ask my mum. So my mum said, I don't want to be on TV. And I said, well, if I did a cookbook, and then I'll actually go to the Islam Channel, I use your recipe to do one of your... Mum was like, yeah, you crack on, right? But I tell you all the recipes, but you're not going to have me on TV because you're just not comfortable. So they're the two ideas that I want to do. Another one that I've thought about is around Saran's story. But I've not really... Actually, I lie. I start writing it, but I've kind of paused it because I need to work out how I want it. So yeah, there you go. I've given you my insight first time.
Just if you don't remember, Sarang was the smuggler who smuggled them in. Yeah?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so this is another question that someone's put out there. I think it's quite a fun question. What would your dream collaboration be? And it can't be Ryan Gosling playing you in the film.
In what context? Any? Okay. Dream collaboration. I won't talk about TV, right? Because that's not really collaboration. I'm not gonna.
Can be Netflix.
I mean, I'd love to have like a cameo of me in my own TV series. That just sounds insane. Like when you see some of those movies that, you know, the head of Google like was on that movie. I can't remember what it's called now, right? I'd love to do stuff with UNHCR and UNICEF and British Red Cross. Because they have the right intent, but I don't think they are delivering the message and give people actually with lived experience. So I'd love to do that, because that would give, to the question we were talking earlier, that would give the exposure that we could really have a huge influence, because they have connections with the circle and the decision makers. So there you go.
You did mention that you do some work with the Red Cross already.
That's correct.
So what capacity do you do that work then?
It's one of those stuff that I can't talk about, right? So British Red Cross CEO Mike Adamson came to the theatre in National at NT in London, and he said, actually, one of the things we really struggle is when we try and have a conversation with the government, we can't express the lived experience because we don't have those, right? And he said, your story can give that insight, and we can have a civilized, constructive conversation. So I got involved, me and my young brother got involved on some of those, and also with them around securing more partnership. So they were like, oh, like here's Hamid Amiri, and he talks about his story, and this is what we're trying to do. But one of the things that I'm exploring with those, and again, it's quite early, is how do we use their platform to put a spotlight on some of the talents that exist in countries such as Afghanistan, such as Palestine, and so many other countries out there. And how do we showcase those talent through British Red Cross, because they have the exposure. And I'm in very, very, very early discussion back and forth about an idea. So just look out. That's what I'm going to say.
My name is Aidan. On your journey, what was the most scariest part?
What was the worst? Most scariest? We were traveling from Holland to UK, and I'm going to call it pit stop. The lorry slows down. The traffickers kind of asks a random question. As they're doing that, another sort of trafficker puts a ladder, gives the person a knife, and if it's a soft top, they cut it and they jump in. When it was our time, Dad went, my family went, I was the last person going in. And as I was walking on top of the lorry started to move, and you know when they say your kind of life flashes in front of you, that sort of analogy. I didn't have that, but I could feel myself falling off the lorry because I was kind of going backwards. And it was a moment that I was content with me falling off as long as my family gets to UK. And when I thought about, because someone asked me that not so long ago, for me, that's the scariest moment, because I was 11 years old, and for me to process that and somehow be okay with it was very scary. And I was very lucky that as I was being kind of falling off, my dad literally grabs me and he pulls me in. And luckily for me, it's a stack of tyres all sort of sitting on top of each other. I go heads in, and my brothers laugh for the next 20 minutes as I try to turn my head the right way around before we got caught in France. But for me, that's the scariest moment, that I was going to lose my family and I was going to be okay with it. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, question.
Hi, I'm Hanan, and I have two questions, if that's okay. The first one came to me when you were talking, and you were saying about all different, things, the places the play has been. I wondered if the book has been translated into Farsi, because it would be really, beautiful. If that's the case.
We were just discussing on a break. I think the publishers are looking at translating it to a few different languages. Sadly, for a marketing perspective, they're waiting for the next big announcement where they're going to utilize that to really launch it off. So for me, I'm excited, but also it's frustrating that I got to wait, because obviously it's the publisher's decision to translate it. So it's not the no, it's the when, and I'm hoping it'd be sooner rather than later. So there you go.
And the other one, I know I'm asking for other people, because they said, is that I missed the play. I read the book. I loved it. I couldn't put it down. Although it is sad, but you know that there'll be some happy ending at the end, because you've written a book. But the question I was really sad that I missed the few days that it was at the Wales Millennium Centre. Is it going to come back, and it should come back for longer, because this is place.
Is it going to come back? Yes. Again, it's the when. I had a conversation not so long ago with Emma, the same lady who I spoke to the very first time, and she said, "Look, we'd love to have it back. It's just a timing of it." You can actually watch the online version, which is NT at Home, because it was recorded in National Theatre. So if you go NT at Home and search for The Boy with Two Hearts, you would see the digital version of it, which was recorded. But if you bear with me, it will come back to Wales Millennium Centre. And I always make a joke saying, do you know what, give us that big room, which has a capacity of 2,000 people or whatever it is. And I was like, leave it with me. I'll make sure we sell it out, because, and I love proving people wrong. I think I'm very stubborn, but in a different way. Maybe my missus would disagree. when people say no, I want to prove them wrong. WMC thought they were actually going to cut out a week. It was on for 3 weeks. After week 1, they were actually going to cut 1 week out because we're not going to sell. By the time we finished the run, there was such a high demand that they were genuinely disappointed, but because the other stuff lined up. When you went to a National Theatre in London, they said, we're going to struggle because cost of living and you're competing with some big names, they haven't got any big actors. We outperform their production. And I think me and Hussein really annoyed the marketing team because we were just doing our own thing, right? We were reaching out to people that we knew and they wanted to take our story on. They were like, that's it, with National Theatre. And I was like, you watch. So I have the same faith that it will definitely come back. And I'm going to push the guys. Maybe I'll speak to the CEO. I think his name is Matt. And I said, look, leave the marketing to me, right? We'll put it in the big room and we'll sell out. I'd love that. If it comes back, I'd love it to be in Gordon Theatre and have 1,000 people watching our story. It's just insane.
Next question. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohsen. So you wrote a book and you've never written before. I was wondering, what advice would you give someone who is attempting a medium of creativity or art that's unfamiliar with having a history with it at all?
Wa alaikum assalam. I think it's work out what you want to do, right? So never forget the why, right? I'm not going to put a commercial spin on it. There is a commercial element to it because sadly, if you're a first-time author, they say is he or she is a sellable product, which is really, really sad, right? So there is something about your personal brand, and I don't think I had a personal brand when I approached them, but I thought I had a really powerful story that anyone would want to be part of it. But if you're talking about not necessarily a book, but another idea, work out what's the market, if there are other products out there, how they're doing it, and what's going to make you distinct. I think that is your angle if I put my commercial hat on, not that I was planning to do that for tonight, right? But for me, think about what makes you distinct, what makes you unique, what makes your voice be a different voice to thousands of people out there. But also, I'll come back to the point I said earlier, you have to believe in yourself and in your product and what you're trying to do. So I'll give a real example, and me and my missus were talking on this earlier. Me and my brother started doing podcast during COVID, right? Which is quite interesting. We've never done it before, again, weirdly. By the time we finished our first or second season, we managed to pull people from actually US, the likes of Zara Mohammed and a few other names, right? And someone said, how'd you do it? I was like, well, I don't know. It was just our unique approach to say, look, we're doing something differently, but we believed in it. That's the biggest thing. You will always hear no. There will be people who will reject and don't believe in your idea, but as long as you do and you make it distinct, you will find a way. I wish I could give you, there's a magic dust that I can give it to you, right? And within 2 months I'll be there, but sadly, it's just the nature of the business.
I've got another question as well. Is there something you wish you knew back when you were writing the book that you know now?
That I don't have to rely on the publishers and I could just self-publish. I think I jumped at the first publisher that said, we want to do this. In my head, I'm a very patient person, but on this project, I was very impatient because I wanted to be out there tomorrow or yesterday. So I wish I explored self-publishing. I wish I explored other publishers, but at the same time, I've got to be very grateful because if they didn't take on the project, it wouldn't be where it is today. But that's the only thing is, it doesn't have to be traditional publishing. It used to be, but these days you could self-publish. You're much more control of the marketing. You're much more control of the actual profit that you could make from the book, and actually even the design of it. The thing that you miss is the marketing and the PR that comes with the traditional publishing. So there you go.
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
I don't know what I'm supposed to. There's two things. So first of all, going back to Hanan's question about translation, I'm putting a request in early that we get a Welsh version, obviously. And then the question is, since you go to schools and you speak to children a lot, have you considered a children's book or an illustration about your story?
It will be now on my to-do list, right? I met a lovely lady who, she wrote the boy back of this class. We actually met her in London. Really lovely lady, and she's written so many. Have I ever explored it? No. Should I? Yes. Because in a really weird way, it's actually so much easier because you don't need 75,000 words. But also someone said to me, writing like a children's book is so much more rewarding because they go in, they read it within 20, 30, 40 pages. And the Welsh, definitely. I think Welsh, Farsi, Arabic, Urdu, definitely up there in translation. But that's interesting because I've not explored asking the Welsh perspective because it's got a Welsh angle to it, right? And there will be an appetite for it. So I will add that to my list as well. So yeah, good questions.
Sorry, it's just that I thought about the children's aspect because, I don't know if you have children yet or if you've experienced much of children's books, Muslim children's books. I'm going out there, I know it's being filmed, but they can be really bad, okay? And either the people who write the books are not writers, and the people who illustrate as well. So I'm not plugging myself here because I haven't done any children's illustrations, but sometimes children's books can be very preachy as well. You know what I mean? It's like they're coming with an angle, like I want to teach this child this, or I want to say this, and it doesn't really need to be like that. It just needs to be a really beautiful story, and it doesn't even need to have. I don't feel it needs to be outwardly Islamic to be a good story, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's like it touches people and it touches children. Sorry, that was a bit more of a rant rather than a question.
No, but I think what's that triggered in my mind, right, is a children's book version of The Boy with Two Hearts, right? Because surprisingly, or in a really nice way, Cateys, the school that I went to, is actually part of the syllabus, which was really a bizarre experience where I had Cateys students came to where I work as part of the programs that we support some of the school, and I had 10 minutes to kind of say, this is me, I work in PwC, and this is what I do. And all the kids were like, we know who you are. I was like, what do you mean? We're in like chapter 10, we're here, and it's actually part of the curriculum. I was like, okay, so my intro's gone out the window. But there's something around that, right? And you're right. I think if you write in a story, just give your perspective rather than go with an agenda, because what you do then, to the point you made earlier, you pigeonhole it into a pocket of groups that you want to do. So maybe I do a children's book version of The Boy with Two Hearts. And it's easy, right? Because it's just concise and, maybe I just use this hour and just put that into interesting. Cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, please.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Khadija. Apologies for bombarding you with questions, but this is my last one. Do you feel like your experience fleeing Afghanistan has negatively impacted your relationship with Afghan culture and your heritage?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating subject on its own, right, where you come from a different country at a young age and you come to UK and you have this hybrid culture that you have to kind of create, and there are tons of articles and there is a word for it. I keep forgetting what it is, but for me, I've been very lucky that I feel like all of our tradition and culture of being Afghan have come across with us. And then you've come to UK and we've adapted it to be a hybrid version. But I think the way I was brought up and faith and religion played a huge factor and still does. I think one of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk about it is faith played a huge factor on that 18 months to keep us going. You know, I never forget Mum doing a dua along that journey. And I was like, there's someone up there looking after us. Like, I have faith. Like, we talked about qismat and, you know, how that plays a factor. And even faith, again, helped me and anchored me when I went through grief and losing my older brother. Because I could have been angry. I could have said, why him and why us? But then, if it's out of your control, when, you know, the moment that you're born is already written in your forehead, when is your date that you're going to pass away, then I was like, well, I'm not going to argue with God, right? So for me, culture and being from Afghanistan plays a huge factor, but now it's like a hybrid version of it.
My name's Nurul. So back to children now, because I'm training to become an educator. You came to our school, primary school, and something you probably wouldn't have known, or you probably would have seen, is how in primary school the children, especially from our ethnic background, they were so they were buzzing. They were going crazy that you had popped in. There was the moment where you weren't coming in, or it was going to be a Zoom call, then you actually turned up, and I actually greeted you myself. I think going back to, I know your experience is quite raw, and it's, unfiltered. And I know we want to inspire children, and they can relate, even through stories of their grandparents or their parents even. How do you, going forward now, you mentioned you want to inspire children or the next generation. I mean, what does that look like to you, and how do you know that you're being successful in inspiring? Because that, you can be quite focused with it, with your story, or like even as a role model or individual or in your position, what does that look like to you when you want to inspire?
So, and by the way, I've captured that moment, right, when I walk in and the kids are screaming, and I was buzzing. I'll never forget it. Actually, I'll be watching it at a day. So for me, there is something about the relatability factor, right? Because the very first time when I went to Cate's, and there was a girl, she was your age, she was like, oh, do you believe can I become a doctor? And I said, yeah, of course you can, as long as you believe it. I walked out and the teacher was crying. I said, are you okay? Did they say anything? She goes, no. I wish they asked me that question for me to, and I said to them, I get that, but what you don't see is they see a bit of themselves in me, right? Because I could be their older brother, right? So there is that factor into it, that there is a relatability factor, be it religion, be it where you come from, be it not from here, they can connect to it. And there's tons of articles about marginalized individuals and how they actually have a connection, even though it's a different marginalized category. For me, how I hoped, and I hope I inspire the next generation, is I stand up and I say to people that me, who is the most worst case scenario of failing my A-levels, failing my GCSEs, not being able to speak the language, actually a bit of a troublemaker, have managed to have a successful career in IT and write a book and a theatre and TV and podcast and whatever else is kind of, children's storybook and a few other stuff, right? I challenge you to believe on whatever it is that is your crazy dream and keep going. So for me, my challenge to the next generation is, you already speak English, you're already here, you already have a safe environment. If I've managed to get where I've got to, you should do 10 times better than me. You should not write one book, but write 10 books. You should become the next, and I've said this, right, if you want to be the next IT engineer, doctor, surgeon, consultant, lawyer, really with Asian culture is either, law, accountancy, and doctor, right? I don't know what's with us in those three topics. But for me, it's that. I say to them, I'm standing here, and I'm the so-called worst case scenario, so you should do 10 times better than me. And it's a relatability factor, right? And there are tons of quotes that I use, like the cheesy one that I did earlier, right? And I keep reminding them to never give up. I keep reminding them to be humble. And I keep reminding them to never forget the people around you. you know, your family, your mum and dad, how much they've sacrificed for you. I keep reminding the next generation that the Xbox, the PS5, and all of those is still going to be around. But your chance of successing in education and doing something about your life, it's now. I can still go and play football, even though I'll probably be really bad. I can still go play, you know, Xbox and PS5, but my time in education is kind of limited, right? Is while I'm there, while I'm young and I'm hungry. So for me, it's drilling that message to the next generation, being myself. And I always say to them, which I get asked a lot of time, don't make it about money. And I think that has, and there's multiple reasons, obviously faith playing one factor, but also telling them to keep yourself humble, because sadly, we're in a time where social media has a huge impact, and it's the Lamborghini and the polished image that you see on the Instagram versus actually I'm the most unpolished version that you see, even though I try to pretend that I can use big words like cathartic, right? But that's the reality of it. And so far, touch wood, it has worked well, or from what I've been told from some of the schools that I have attended. So yeah, there you go. That's how I look, and I hope to inspire the next generation.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, wow. A lot to take in there, but thank you so much for coming and telling your story, and I hope everyone enjoyed or learned something. I definitely did, even though I've had multiple conversations with you about your story. But yeah, was there any last piece of advice that you wanted to give, or just anything that any more quotes that you wanted to drop?
I've got loads, right? And if you see something on a clothing brand in due course with those quotes, don't be surprised. Not that I'm trying to, you know, I love the hoodies ideas, right? But for me, a big thank you for every individual here, you guys behind the scenes to make this happen, and everyone turning up here, spending the Saturday evening listening to, you know, me blabbing about my story, and, you know, having Omar calling me Amir early on when the mic wasn't on. But yeah, just a big thank you. And if anything you've not asked and didn't feel like you want to ask but you want to do, give me a shout. I'm proud to answer your questions. So there you go.
Thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause, please, for Hamlet?